Good afternoon. That sounds about like my high school class. Let's try again. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Okay, proper. I need to start by acknowledging that we're on indigenous land and to ask permission from the indigenous ancestors of this land to share palabra with you today. And then given that permission, I was asked to come and do an abbreviated talk, which I've been sharing with educators quite some time, that builds nicely on the talk that was just given. As the intro said, I've been a teacher in my community in East Oakland for, this is my 25th year. This will be my 25th year. Talk about trauma. There you have some. So I understand I get some kind of tinfoil watch or something this year. So I'm the youngest of 7 kids. And as the youngest, I often felt like it was my birthright to complain about pretty much everything. And I remember one time I came in the house and I was ranting and raving about something. My mother stops me in the middle of my rant and she points at the kitchen table and she says, "Sit down." She goes in the kitchen and she fills a glass halfway with water and comes back and sets the glass between us and points at the glass and says, "Half full or half empty?" And my mom's was good for those kind of trick questions where there is no right answer, so whatever answer you give is the wrong answer, and that's the lesson I'm going to give you right now. So I didn't take the bait on this occasion, so she proceeds to say, "Son, how you choose to answer that question is how you will live your life. Because your life will always be both half full and half empty. And if you choose to see your life as half empty, if you choose to see your life for all the things that you don't have, you'll never fill your cup. But if you can see your life as half full, if you can see your life for the things that you do have, you'll fill your cup, it will overflow, and you can share that with others." Now, this is precisely what I think that Tupac Shakur means when he talks about young people growing up in poverty as the roses that grow from concrete. And you can come down anywhere you want on Pac. Cornel West says, "No one free of spot or wrinkle." And I agree. I think Pac deserves to be critiqued for some of the things that he did and some of the things that he said and some of the ways that he lived his life, but who doesn't? What is undeniable to me as a veteran of the high school English classroom is the impact that Tupac continues to have. Long after his murder in 1996, my students are still bumping Pac. Hey, truth be told, this sister right here, I know you're not still in high school. You look good, but you're not still in high school. She's like me too, right? Truth be told, some of y'all walked in here bumping Pac, right? And so as a teacher, I wanted to understand what is it about Pac's message that has been so transcendent. It's not hip-hop, because if it was hip-hop, then kids would still be listening to KRS-One and Wu-Tang and Public Enemy, and they're not. Right? But they are still listening to Pac. I can tell you as a veteran high school English teacher that I could take a crisp $100 bill and stick it inside of any Shakespearean text and leave that text anywhere in my classroom and it is completely safe. But if I leave Pac's book of poetry out, a lot of folks don't know Pac wrote a book of poetry. Okay? It's called "A Rose That Grew from Concrete." If I leave that book of poetry out anywhere in my class, it's immediately snatched up. And it's snatched up by the very same kids that the system is convinced aren't interested in literacy. Okay? I tell teachers, I tell principals, I told Arnie Duncan to his face, okay, that it's not that young people, I don't know why that gets applause, but okay. It's not that young people aren't interested in literacy. It's that they're not interested in literacy we're giving them. Okay? And a lot of things that Michael just laid out, right, are some of the root causes for that. That the things that we're asking young people to read and connect to in school are so fundamentally disconnected from the material conditions of their lives that it's like, what's the point, right? Why are we even talking about this right now when I don't even know where my next meal is coming from, right? So if we can't connect our pedagogy and our curriculum to the material conditions of the most vulnerable youth in our society, then they're going to stay disconnected, right? And the disconnection starts from school and it spins out to virtually every other institution we have in our society. Okay? And frankly, there's no debate about this in the research. And this is what Pac refers to as the concrete. Right? Now, of all the stuff I've read, all the experts I've met with, nothing has more impacted my day-to-day classroom practice than this film series. It's a 6-part film series from PBS. It's the largest study ever conducted in research of the impact of inequality on a society, and particularly focused on how it impacts young people. It has a great website, tons of resources for teachers. I know kinder teachers all the way up to senior faculty at the university where I work that use this in some shape, form, or fashion. And the list is long, y'all. The concrete is deep, it's complex, it's multi-layered. And when you think about concrete, it's probably the worst possible environment in which something can attempt to grow. It's devoid of light, it's devoid of key nutrients, and on top of all that, it's toxic. Okay? Now, there is no debate in the medical field, or in the neuroscience, or in social epidemiology, or in public health about the impact of these things. We need not talk about whether or not we're in a post-racial society because we had a black president, because there's simply no research evidence to support that fact. Okay? We live in a white supremacist, racist, classist, homophobic society. Gavin laid it out. Okay? Sexist, patriarchal society. Thank you for catching me. Okay? And schools mirror that, or they disrupt it. Okay? And if schools disrupt that, okay, then we are going to start transforming our society, one generation at a time. Right? Now, I can't tell you where y'all need to focus in your communities, because I'm not from your communities. Right? I'm from the 3400 block in East Oakland, okay, where I'm raising my 2 boys. Okay? And in our community, the starting point is crystal clear. Okay? I live in one of the most violent communities in the country, and frankly, it's been that way since the 80s. Okay? In 2006, the San Francisco Chronicle called itself so concerned with homicide in my community, they started mapping it. And they said that we had the plague. Now, what you probably might not be catching about this particular slide and this map is the fact that our plague has been almost perfectly quarantined between 2 freeways. Okay? And the funny thing about the plague, if we really had the plague, y'all would be in trouble right now, wouldn't you? Because the plague's the ultimate non-discriminator, isn't it? It doesn't recognize race, it doesn't recognize class, it doesn't recognize gender, and it certainly doesn't recognize political boundaries. And as you can see, our plague's been almost perfectly quarantined between the 580 and the 880 freeways. And you don't have to be a topographical genius looking at this map to see the outlier. What is it? Somebody said it, say it loud. Piedmont. And what the hell is going on in Piedmont where they can completely opt out of the plague? Just be like, nah, I'm cool, I don't want any. Now, Cornel West jokes that Disneyland brags nobody's ever died on their premises. He says somebody probably has, they just push them across the line to keep their record clean. Okay. I think that's what happened right there. Okay, that was almost certainly in Piedmont. They just gave it right back to us. One more for Oakland, they won't care. 5 years, we have 555 homicides in a city of a little over 400,000 people. Okay. 2000, I don't even know why I'm pointing at that, because that's not going to change it. 2009, the San Francisco Chronicle gives up, and the Oakland Tribune starts mapping homicide. Now every year on the front page of the Tribune, we have the homicide map once a year. The names, the faces, and the places of everybody who's murdered in our community. These are 4 of the more recent homicide maps, and so I decided that I'm going to update the homicide map, and I'm going to do that for 13 years, because that's how many years young people are actually in school in our community. This is 9 years, y'all. This kid is just showing up to my freshman high school English class, and you tell me, where can a young person live where they have not personally witnessed homicide, if not multiple homicides? My 2 boys, 4.5 years old, twin boys, by the time they were 2, they'd already seen somebody on our block get murdered. By the time they were 2. So you talk about aces, right? Aces stack up real quick in my hood. And we know from the research, as Michael nicely laid out, that this exposure to trauma causes PTSD. But the problem with the conversation about PTSD is that it's mostly focused on this dude, which is right, because soldiers are particularly prone to PTSD. But very few folks are talking about these brothers right here. These are my students. This is me on the camera. This is us burying another one of my students, a 16-year-old stabbed more than a dozen times in the face with a screwdriver about 3 blocks from my house. And this is who buried him. And the next day, right, they're all back at school. And what's the conversation about? geometry, biology, your homework, Common Core, okay? No Child Left Behind, college to career pathways. Okay? Y'all working schools that are data-driven, right? Y'all data-driven? Okay. Cool. I think we should be data-driven. Okay? But it's not about being data-driven, it's being driven by the right data. Okay? So if we're not transforming the outcomes for the nation's most vulnerable youth in schools, we must be looking at the wrong data. So here's some data for us. This is the national data on youth trauma. 1 in 3 urban youth display the symptoms of mild to severe PTSD. 1 in 3. When they compared that to the Pentagon's data for soldiers returning from live combat, what they found is that urban youth are actually twice as likely to experience PTSD than a soldier returning from live combat. Okay? If your entire class was combat vets, what's the first training you'd want? PTSD. But we're twice as likely as somebody with a classroom full of combat vets to be working with young people that are exposed to PTSD, and yet we get virtually none of this training in our pre-service and none of this training in our ongoing professional development. In point of fact, in 2011, Harvard School of Public Health said, actually, these young people don't have PTSD. Because PTSD stands for what? Post-traumatic, which makes sense for a soldier because the soldier leaves the battlefield, but what about young people? Right, they're right back in it. So in 2011, Harvard School of Public Health released a completely new diagnosis to talk about what we actually see going on inside of children's bodies and brains that are exposed to unrelenting toxic stress. And they call it CPTSD because what we're seeing, what Michael described that is going on in these children's bodies is more complex than what we see going on in the bodies of soldiers returning from live combat. And yet, we go on Common Core, right? This is Common Core in my neighborhood. Okay? This is Common Core in the communities where we continue to not get the level of engagement and achievement from young people that we want. Okay? And while the medical field and neuroscience knows this, there's few, if any, resources flowing into these districts to support teachers to actually be able to respond. There's a lot of resources coming in to blame teachers for not responding, right? But it's easy to blame somebody you don't actually support. So we talk about Common Core. We talk about test scores. We talk about be calm, do your homework. Okay? I saw somebody, please tell me this person here. I saw somebody walking around yesterday with a shirt that said, keep calm. That's you, sister. I saw you yesterday. I was like, oh, I want that shirt. She had a shirt that said, keep calm. I'm a teacher. Please hit me up. Let me know where you got that shirt. I'm wearing that all day. So we're developing all these, right, responses. And look, I'm a teacher. You're never going to catch me saying these things don't matter, but they're out of their proper place. When we're privileging Common Core over children's humanity, okay, we're a morally bankrupt system. Now look, if we do nothing differently, okay, we just leave the concrete as is and just business as usual in school. Okay, the truth is that some roses will still grow out of that concrete. Okay. If we innovate, okay, and for my money, the classroom is one of the places where we can innovate most profoundly to support and transform the lives of children. If we innovate, if we get a little more water down into the cracks in the concrete, the truth is that we can grow more roses. And we know this, right? You go classroom to classroom to classroom, school to school to school. There are some of us in our ranks that are more effective at engaging and developing vulnerable youth than others. So we know that there are some practices that are more effective than others, right? But this is the work that we tried to do. Okay, so we started a program in East Oakland called the East Oakland Septic College Program. We started with 30 students, and we specifically recruited the students in the high school that were the most vulnerable. Okay, and what we did was we wrapped services around them for 4 consecutive years. So I looped with them as a high school teacher. I was their high school teacher in 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. Okay? And we had a 92% four-year college going rate. Okay? And the comparative data over that same period was 23% graduation rate and a 5% college eligible rate. Not college, we actually tracked whether they went. Most schools just track whether or not they're eligible. Okay? So eligibility doesn't mean going in our community, because a lot of kids that are even college eligible go straight to work, right? Or just think college isn't for them. And then we remixed it and did it again. And we bumped it to 95 that year. And I tell this story, hey, not to laud the work that we did as teachers in the community, but to say that it is really important as educators that we lift up a counter narrative, okay? That we tell a story, a half-full story about what is possible in our communities, so that other teachers, particularly early career teachers, come in believing that narrative as opposed to the meta-narrative about what's not possible with our children. But, hey, okay. It's important that we say how we did it, okay? That I wasn't any more efficient than any of my colleagues at drill and kill, hey, at vocabulary, hey, at getting kids to summarize complex texts and ideas. Hey, that we essentially led with the basic needs framework. Every time a kid in my classroom struggled, I pulled out Maslow. Food, clothing, shelter, safety. I frankly don't give a shit whether or not you can read if you don't love yourself. You understand? This is how we get a housing crisis. This is how we get a collapse of the banking industry. These cats went to the most elite universities in the country. They could read them some books, right? But they lacked a moral compass, right? So they're getting all the test scores, but they can't, their moral compass is so fucked up, they can't even find the parking lot. Okay? Because we've de-emphasized this, okay, and begun to emphasize false rigor. Okay? This is rigor. So we focus on basic needs. Do kids feel a sense of love and belonging? Do they love themselves? Okay? And we know from the research that when those pieces are in place, those are the people that self-actualize. Right? And the people that self-actualize are the people that transform communities like mine. So what we did is not enough. Okay? The homicides continue in my community despite all of this, right, incredible college going coming out of East Oakland Step to College, because there's so many services that are still missing, right? And so I'm fully in agreement with this idea. My son just gave me a snake, you see? Okay, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this, so I'll just wear it, okay? Continue talking. You ever had that kid in your classroom just comes up randomly, gives you a snake, and we good? Yeah, we good. Right, we use this. We'll incorporate it into the lesson. I'm not sure yet how. I'll find a way, son. Thank you. We got to start figuring out a way, hey, where, and I agree with some of the earlier comments about making the school as the center of wellness in a community, right? But we can't put all this on teachers. We can't put all this on, I mean, you could, but y'all better start giving us all the medical dollars, hey, all the mental health dollars, all the prison dollars. Like, go ahead, like we do everything else anyway. Go ahead, give us that too, hey? But give us the budget, hey? They just give us the work with no budget, right? So how do we start thinking about a much more comprehensive set of partnerships in our communities so that when we do identify those things that young people need, when that trauma does show up, that we actually are resourced enough to be able to support young people, okay, to grow into the wellness that they need to show up fully in our classrooms. Now, this, right, is often the idea that people land on when they start hearing me talk about it. Like, oh, you're talking about like Harlem's Children's Zone, like Jeffrey Canada. Okay? No, not exactly. Okay? Because see, the problem with Canada's model, well, there's a whole lot of problems with Canada's model, actually. Right? But one of the problems with Canada's model, it's the model of out-migration. Right? What they're going to tell my sons on a 3400 block of East Oakland, the same thing they told me when I was coming up. Okay? They're going to tell my sons that they're the deserving few. They're not like, okay, their brothers and sisters. Right? And so they deserve this kind of school so that they can escape the neighborhood. And every time a teacher told me that, every time a teacher told me that I could use school to escape my neighborhood, I stopped trusting them. Because I didn't want to escape my neighborhood. Do you understand the code that sits underneath that? The code that sits underneath that is my problem is my mama. My problem is my cousin that's on the corner. My problem is my brother and my sister that are running the streets. And I never thought that. I never thought. In fact, point of fact, those were the people that I believe were most likely to protect me. I felt most unsafe at school. I felt most safe on the block. And schools didn't get that because so many of my teachers were not from my community and were not trying to be in my community after the sun went down. And Canada's model is one where the deserving few families and kids who really want an education get to come and get all these resources so that they can leave our community. And so what ends up happening is they grow all these roses, right? And then they out-migrate, and what's left behind? And here we go again, right? Stuck right back in the concrete, permanently trying to grow roses out of the concrete. So I'll end by connecting us to the ancestor and one of the best teachers that I've ever had, which is Maya Angelou. She tells this story. She told us this story in an interview not long before she passed about this time she was on a movie set. It was in the 90s. She was on a movie set of Poetic Justice. She comes out of her trailer. And when she comes out, she sees these two young brothers about to fight. And so she runs down and intervenes. And when she first intervenes, the brother that she's facing, right, starts just cursing at her. Right? And she's like, okay, I've heard all that before, but do you understand how important you are? Do you understand what our people have been through just so that you can draw a breath? And he curses at her again, right? He's trying to get it, dude. And she's like, that's okay. I've heard that too. But I need you to understand how important you are to me. Never met him. This young man's life that she intervened in was a young man named Tupac Shakur. Not long after the interaction, or at the end of the interaction, Pac starts weeping. And then not long after that, he calls his mom, Afeni Shakur. Says, Mom, this woman named Maya Angelou, doesn't even know who she is, just saved my life. So Afeni calls Maya and thanks her. This happens in Pac's life circa 1991. Okay? That's when Poetic Justice comes out. Now, if you study Tupac's work as an artist, what you'll find is that the period between 1991 and 1996, that 5-year period, was the most productive artistic period of his life. He wrote so much during those 5 years that Maya bought him by intervening in his life at that moment, that they couldn't publish it all. This is why Pac has album after album after album coming out after he's murdered in 96 on the streets of Vegas. One of the albums that was written in its entirety during that 5-year period was an album called Resurrection, which is released in 2003. In 2009, my homie snaps this photo in Kathmandu. It's a picture of 3 brothers standing in front of one of the largest Buddhist shrines in the world. The oldest brother in the middle is turned to his right, consoling his middle brother whose hand is on his head because he's weeping. And the baby brother on the left is watching, learning empathy. What you might not catch about this photo is the shirt that the oldest brother is wearing. That is the album shirt from Resurrection. And that is why our work matters so much. What I've learned over the course of this work is that the point of education is not to escape poverty. The point of education is to end it. And that means when we start talking about student success, we can't be measuring student success by how far away from our communities our young people get. Right? We got to start talking about student success as measurable impact in the community, and particularly the communities that are the most vulnerable in this society. Because what we know is that when roses come back to the concrete, they grow rose gardens. And the White House is not the only house that should have a rose garden in front. And so what I've learned over the course of my 25 years grinding in this work is that I'm a hope dealer. And I'm a hope dealer battling dope dealers. And I'm not talking about the dope dealer that stands in the corner pushing nickel and dime bags. I'm talking about dope dealers that teach our young people to hate themselves, to hate the color of their skin, the texture of their hair, the language that they speak, the hood that they come from, their ancestors. And as long as schools do not commit to teaching our young people to love themselves for who they are, then we're pushing dope into their veins. And that's that dope pushed by a Pearson or a Holt Mifflin who never spends a minute on my block to actually design y'all are so hard to talk to because you get it. Can't even finish a sentence. Y'all are like, yeah. It's like church. Right? It feels like church with teachers. And as long as, right, those are the folks that are designing, right, the foundations of our work, right, our young people are going to be sick. No way a young person points a heater at somebody that looks just like them and pulls the trigger unless they hate themselves. Right? How are we going to demand as educators that this nation start measuring our impact on love and on wellness? Okay? Because those are the young people ultimately, okay, that speak a message like Pox that resonates deeply with young people from communities like mine and communities like yours that will transform us finally from the rhetoric of a pluralistic multiracial democracy into the reality of a pluralistic multiracial democracy. Be a hope dealer. Push hope into the veins of young people every day you do this work. And if I can support you in any way on that journey, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you.